Do you like books? I mean, really, really like books? Then you're in the right place. Each week, your host, Sam Hankin, interviews the best of today's top-selling authors and the up-and-coming superstars of modern literature. This is The Avid Reader. Here is your host, Sam Hankin.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of The Avid Reader, brought to you by Wellington Square Bookshop. Our guest today is Han Yu, author of The Curious Human Knee. Published by the Columbia University Press, it was released earlier this year. Han is a professor of scientific and technical communication at Kansas State University. Her previous popular science book is Mind Thief, The Story of Alzheimer's. And her earlier works include The Other Kind of Funnies, Comics and Technical Communication, and then Scientific Communication, Practices, Theories, and Pedagogies, as well as 4 other books too. The knee, and my right one hurts as I speak, supports body weight, not all of it, helps us move around as bipeds and stops us from falling over. It's a natural shock absorber, and because we are standing up, it slows us down. But it also allows us to carry the groceries or throw a bowling ball. It's kind of a makeshift hinge, and it contains a bunch of anterior, medial, and collateral cruciates, as well as other tons of doodads, including the patella, which as a kid always seemed so weird. But ligament tears, meniscus injuries, Han may complain a bit about those. Osteoarthritis, I think that's me, I'm old. And tendonitis, to name just a few of the things that kind of can be screwed up. Though, and this was what I did not expect in the book, we learn about the roaring 20s and flappers and taking the knee, like in Game of Thrones, as well as in football games and protest, or in using up the clock, and tragically, George Floyd. Han explores not only an anatomical structure, but a cultural touchstone. And she sprinkles the book with humor, which as a bookseller, I know really draws the reader in and pulls them along through the book, even if her knee-jerk reaction may solicit a groan. But in any event, enough about knee. So welcome, Han, and thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Sam. I'm so glad to be here.
Well, one of the things I was curious about, and I could be wrong about this, but in the beginning, you seemed to imply that the knee wasn't really evolution and crowning achievement. Did I get that right?
I guess yes and no. I mean, we survived, right? That very fact means it's doing something right. But I don't think, evolution is an ongoing process. The humans are not sitting at the top of the evolution tree and being the perfect specimen that it is. It's still ongoing, and we haven't stood up for very long in the whole grand scheme of evolution. And the knees are, we're the only mammals who stand up and work bipedally habitually. The apes, they don't. The monkeys, they don't. So I do think it's always difficult to speculate, what's compromised and what is not. But if we just look at the anatomy, based on what I have researched, yes, the knees are adapted just so that we can stand up and work bipedally, and we can, do a lot of the things that we can now. Our hands are liberated and all that. But I don't think it's this crown jewel, it's this perfect adaptation. I don't think anything, come to think of it, can be perfect. The brain is certainly not perfect. Having come out of my last book on Alzheimer's, as we age, things break down. I think it's difficult to talk about this concept of perfection in evolution. Yeah, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And especially it ties into the book because, again, in the beginning, you talk about Lucy and not only her ancestors, but her progeny as well, so to speak. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that, because that goes right into bipedalism and hominids.
Right. So Lucy is one of the the earliest, not the earliest, one of the earliest specimens we found that that have what, I mean, people always, that's the thing with paleoanthropology is a lot of it, I shouldn't say a lot of it, there's always an element of speculation because these are animals or people, if we want to call them people, long gone. I mean, there's always an element of speculation, but general consensus is that Lucy is habitually bipedal. It has knees that are very similar anatomically to modern humans' knees, right? It's straight. It has telltale signs of walking bipedally habitually. And it's a very interesting, if you read the discovery of it, it's very interesting, exciting. A lot of the work people have done in paleoanthropology is by luck, right? You just happen to chance upon these knees or the skeleton, and then you try to look at and compare and speculate. Okay, what does it seem like this specimen was like when they were alive?
One of the things that interested me about that was that, here's a knee, it's right here. We do surgery, we replace them. We can look at every aspect of it, whether we're looking at cadavers. But at the same time, you talk about how all these researchers have different theories and they all like theirs the best. And I was thinking, how is it that there can be so much contradictory research when then it's right here? It's right here and all this stuff.
Right. That's I think that's a fundamental thing about science. I think increasingly people are realizing, especially I think coming out of the pandemic in the recent, history, many people, I hope at least, are realizing that science is never black and white. But too often many people believe, or they want to believe so. And even I guess that's one of the reasons some people think, well, there is nothing to really write about the knee because it's black, white, it's right there. Unlike, for example, the brain, you can't really see it, you can't really dissect it all that well compared to the knee, I guess. But so much of everything, really, even though I always, cringe about saying everything in absolute terms, but so much in science is it's a process of discovery, and everybody is going to have their own opinions. If we think about cadaver, for example, to be a little bit more specific, cadavers have, they have to be frozen, for example, and then you don't get to dissect it until I don't know how long later. And that freezing process can change tissues. Even if they are fresh frozen, it could still make things different. And more fundamentally, we're humans. When we dissect, often what we are concluding upon the results depends on the procedures we used. How are we dissecting it, and how are we interpreting what we are looking at? So things are never black and white, and the knee is so interesting because you would think it's a simple joint and everybody has the same knee, and that's not true. Everybody's knee is, and I can say about other aspects of the human anatomy, things I haven't researched upon other aspects, but I wouldn't be surprised that a lot of our anatomies has individual differences, and that's certainly the case with the knee.
But not to put too fine a point on it, but I've seen football players tear their ACL. I know people who have done it skiing, as you talk about. Mm-hmm. And yet there are still discussions between doctors and researchers about exactly the configuration of the ACL.
Right.
And yeah, okay, I understand people are different. Everybody has a different anatomy, women, men, all that. But it seems like the ACL is there. You're repairing it. You're doing a great job of repairing it. How can you not be sure whether it has 1, 2, 3, 4 bands crossing around and all that? I'll leave you alone after that.
Okay, sure. Well, yes, you're right. People do. There are no consensus that I have seen when I was reading. There are a lot of people would subscribe maybe to one main idea, main theory. But if you look at the research on ACL, people say, it's like, one fiber, one group of fiber, or is it two group? And we're not talking about giant things that you can observe. They're tiny, right? Like how many strands of fibers are there? And it also makes a difference how you're looking at their movement. So when they're moving together, okay, you're saying, okay, that's one strand. But if they move somewhat differently, you say, okay, I think there are two strands and they kind of work a little differently. And maybe there are 6 strands and there are 10 strands. So it's not like, like right there, black and white. And also there's so many other minor, I guess it could be the word that we use because we don't talk about them very often. They're minor ligaments or tissues around the knee that help out the ACL with, movement, with stability. How much they contribute is not, there's no consensus on that. So depending on how you dissect, so when people do studies on cadavers, they dissect this one first, so they cut this ligament first, and they cut that ligament for second and third, so they see how the knee changes. So there's not a straightforward process of figuring out how things work.
Well, if we go more, I guess it would be inductively. And this is your quote. You say bipedalism is more often a source of pain than amusement. And I thought, well, does she really mean that?
Oh, I think sometimes when people read these out of context, they get mad at me. I just recently got like a very short excerpt about the book published on the Wall Street Journal, and people are like, oh, what is she saying? Or, she doesn't know what she's talking. But sometimes a lot of these are tongue-in-cheek. Like I'm trying to say, am I glad I'm upright and working bipedally? For sure. I mean, I can do a lot of, I joke about that in the book, right? Like I can do stuff that apes would never possibly do, operate on a laptop, grab a bunch of bananas as I ran away from people who were pursuing me, whatever. But I do think, and I think maybe some of that comes out of my own frustration of my own knee. It's they get painful often, at least for me. So I try to be humorous in the book because that's just the way I think, that's the way I talk. And I hope it lands well on some readers. And if it doesn't, hey, that's what it is.
I know. We have lots of book clubs. One of them is a nonfiction book club, and there's always two sides. And someone's going to say, well, why would she say that? That's not true. And the other one will say, no, it was really funny. I really enjoyed that. But that's just the way it is. But then, you talk about Lewis carrying snacks at the zoo. And I was thinking, oh, yeah, it's true. I mean, I can't carry a bag of Fritos or a box of Pringles if I'm not biped. And it's like very handy that I have both opposable thumbs and knees.
Yes, definitely. Just think about, I mean, we are sacrificing things. We're never going to be as fast. So I do dog sports, so I'm very keenly aware I'm never going to beat my dog in running, but gosh, I can do a lot of things she cannot, right? So just that's, you give up some and you gain some. That's what it is.
Yeah, evolution is trade-offs. But, I know what I was going to. The all, capital ALL. I had no idea what that was.
Oh, what's it? Arterial ligament. Let me see.
Here you go.
Yeah, there we go. See, I couldn't find it now. Let's see.
It's all right. We'll clean it up.
No, that's fine. No worries. I need to. Case sensitive. There we go.
It's tough.
Yeah. Anterolateral ligament, right? So the front outer side of the knee. It connects to the thigh bone, the lateral meniscus, and the shin bone. So this is one that I think, if I'm remembering correctly, it's one of those assistant, whatever we call them, minor ligament that could help the ACL, but there's no consensus that it does. And it's never something we really talk about. I mean, I've gotten a couple of MRIs for the knee, and I feel like often people would say, oh, you know, the ACL is good, the PCL is good, and all the major ligaments are good. But until I've done the research for the book, I did not know there's so many other ligaments that exist there, but you don't really hear about them. And that's all part of that, that complexity that we don't really get to know about the knee.
When you said about the MRIs, which I also have gotten, I really enjoyed the sentence where you said, you know, because I did it too. You've been to 2 sports physicians, 2 physical therapists, 1 chiropractor, pain meds, anti-inflammatories, and strengthening exercises. And the kinesthesiologist guy I went to, it didn't help at all. I mean, we went through the motions, but it didn't help.
Yep. I think at the end of the day, and I keep trying alternative therapies too, right? Laser and all that, and which I didn't even get to in the book because the research gets a little bit more, excuse me, scarce. But I guess we keep trying to muddle through, and some of them might just be placebo effect, where we're feeling like we're doing something and it makes us feel better. And maybe some of that is fine as long as it's not hurting. So I take supplement, I take turmeric, whatever, anti-inflammatory. But knowing, so people would ask me, so should I, take this? I would say, well, there's no robust scientific research on it, but I am personally taking it because I don't think it's hurting me. So
there's this cream I use called Australian Dream, and it seems to work, but I think it's placebo. And then also CBD, but someone made a batch with real THC in it.
Yeah.
It seems to help, but then I have no idea whether it's really helping or not. But
right.
It does. But okay, let's get back onto the actual book, because as a bookseller, we are trying to sell it. Which the pivotal point in the book to me was when you switched, and I thought, okay, this is going to be about the knee, the anatomy. I was fascinated. And then all of a sudden you switched to fashion and the 20s and flappers and painting your knees. And I was wondering, what were you thinking when you decided, okay, I'm also going to do this?
I decided on that earlier on. And I don't know if some readers will like the answer, because I get a little bored writing about the same thing over and over. And I don't want to write like 10 chapters on the anatomy of the knee. One, I'm not this is not an anatomy textbook, and there are tons and tons of people who are much better qualified to write an anatomy textbook than I do. 2, in my years of research on popular science communication, I have come to believe, for better or worse, that we really have got an interest and engage readers if we're going to try to make them read popular science. So writing about every single minute detail of the anatomy of the knee doesn't strike me, at least, who I also read, a lot of popular science books, doesn't strike me as something that would interest the everyday readers. So that's another reason. And then the third reason is and maybe that's one of the bigger reasons, I should say sooner rather than last. Again, based on all my research on popular science communication, I am a firm believer that science, medical science especially, but science in general, has got to be situated in history, in society, which would include things like fashion, which should include things like aesthetics, women's rights, because all the cutting edge things we are doing or trying to do in medical science, it's for nothing if there are no people to to serve it. I mean, that's what science is all about, is serving the people. So without social and historical contact, there's nothing. So I am a firm believer in that, and I think the humanities has a lot to offer for our understanding, appreciation of science. That's why I purposefully try to put all that in the book that's about the knee. It's, I think I said this in the book. It's not just to the effect, right? Not maybe in the exact word. It's not what our body is like. It's what we do with it. We play sports standing up on knees, but we also wear skirts and showcase those knees, or we are forbidden to showcase our knees. So I think it all matters, in my opinion.
And at the very end, when you do your final note, and at first I go, wait a minute, why is he saying this? And you said, this is not a book designed to educate you. And at first I thought, well, what is it supposed to be? And then I realized, no, it is, I don't know if it's a bad word, it was entertaining. And in addition to entertaining, yes, you did. Yeah. And again, you did it tongue in cheek, because you do learn a lot. Mm-hmm. But then when you get off on, and this made me think too, because of the knee as a sign of respect. And you talk about Colin Kaepernick, and you talk about, again, taking a knee in order to run the clock out in football. And then the woman in soccer who didn't take the knee, but put her hand on the shoulder mm-hmm. of her friend. And then I realized, oh yeah, it's always been a sign of respect. And subservience in some situations, like mm-hmm. where you have to demonstrate yourself. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that was really good, because I never would have put the two together.
Two and two together, yeah.
Yeah, wouldn't have.
Yeah, that's. I'm so glad you're like my ideal reader. That's the reaction I want to see from readers. And I have come to peace that not everybody will be like that. Some would go, what is that all about? Like a mix of nonsense. This, I'm not, it's supposed to be about the science and about the anatomy. But again, like I said, the word science is coded with so much. When people say it should be just about the science, I honestly don't know how to respond to that, because in my opinion, everything is entangled. But I do want to, it's a little bit of tongue in cheek that I'm not here to educate. But it's also kind of serious, because when we say education, I am an educator. I teach in the classroom, and I'm comfortable to say I educate in the classroom in a very confined and defined area. But when it comes to the popular science book in the public domain, nobody is going to be an expert on everything there is about the knee. An orthopedic surgeon may be a very skilled surgeon, but she or he is not going to have the kind of perspective even their patients may have, who have had double knee replacement surgeries. So I think education is, and it's funny that you said maybe you wonder if it's a poor, a bad word, that it's entertaining. I don't think it is. I'm proud that my book is entertaining. Like I said, I think that's a first step for people to want to read this book. If they're not entertaining, honestly, people are not going to read. I mean, there's the internet, there's the TV, there's cable, there's the phone, there's actual football games they can watch. Why would they want to read about the knee and how people, hurt their knees when they play football? So I think being entertaining is great. I'm glad people think it's entertaining. I love to read responses that say that, and then say, well, then in that process, I realized I learned a lot. That's all there is. Yeah.
Well, one, again, as a bookseller, we talked about this earlier, show the cover of the book. That's the best.
Sure. Here is the book.
And the interesting thing about it is, on the knee, you have these lines reading out, and to me, that indicated pain, simply because you and I have pain, but it can also mean that you're just focusing on that area of the body. But I immediately thought that's what it feels like.
Yep. Yeah. I love this cover. And I kind of, and my publisher, she's great. I mean, the Columbia is great. My editor is great, and they work with me. But I kind of insisted on something that's kind of lighthearted and fun like this. I remember earlier, like the initial version they gave me just looks like an anatomy book. I'm like, oh, I don't think so. I want something a little bit more fun. So I'm really glad they worked with me and gave me this. I like it. I love it.
Yeah, and the word curious adds a lot to it too, because that definitely draws people in. Oh, and the other thing is, if you want to be educated, you know, sometimes at the beginning you think it's a pretty long book, but then you realize half of the book is notes and the bibliography. So if you want to be educated, it's a great way of having an index of how to become totally educated about the name.
Yes, yes. And I think reading those would be an educational experience. Because those are written in a very narrow context for a very defined audience. Those are medical journal articles that if you want to read, I think you will be educated on very specific procedures of how people conduct experiments and things like that. But that's not what I think I want to, write about in a popular science book. And the reality, again, as I said, I'm sure there are exceptional audiences out there, but in my research, I don't think everyday reader would like to sit down and read a medical journal article.
When I leaped through it, there were certain things that I will read.
Yeah.
Or words pop out and you go, oh yeah, I am interested in that.
Yeah.
Which reminds me, when you were talking about knee replacements. So my one brother has had both knees replaced. He's in great shape. My other brother, I think it's, you talk about hereditary aspect, but, and even in your family. But my other brother hasn't done it. And now he's become kind of bow-legged too, because he's waited so long, but his stuff says, and he's the kind of person too, he's stubborn, says, wait till it's bone on bone. And I've heard that expression so many times, bone on bone.
Yeah. Bone on
bone. I wonder whether you or I or both of us are going to end up resorting to that.
I thought about that actually. I wondered if I would have to do something like that. Fortunately, so my mother is the one that again, as I talked about in the book, the genetics of it is complex. So there could be elements of genetics, but exactly which gene or genes really determining that there's no consensus. And even if there is, I wonder, genetics therapy is upon us, but can we really make a difference? But anyway, so my mother is the one that I suspect that inherited some of these issues, but luckily she has not had knee replacements. So I wonder what mine may look like, let's say 10, 15 years down the road. The good thing though is I've seen just from friends and people around me, fellow weekend warriors who have done knee replacements, I see them still being active. So people sometimes, I've actually just today, somebody emailed me after they saw my work. They say they were reluctant to do, knee replacement and asked if there is a magic cure for osteoarthritis. Unfortunately not. And the research would say knee replacement is still the best treatment there is currently for OA. And I think it comes down to a personal choice, personal decision to some extent.
Well, Americans are so impatient. It's like, 30% of Americans taking antidepressants. And I think some people are like, oh, my knee hurts, I got a replacement. And it's just a knee-jerk response. And the orthopedic surgeon might be the same kind of person.
That could be too. So you could get two ends of the spectrum, people who delay it for too long. Then if you keep delaying it, then your surgical outcome may not be as good. But if you jump right in, you have to realize that that artificial knee is not going to last forever. It's getting longer, but I think I've heard people who in their 40s got knee replacements, and that was a little shocking, and has to get revisited and all that. But like I said, it's never a black and white thing. Yeah.
Like people don't like the idea of living with pain because in America, the idea is I need to fix that. It's like cataract surgery. after cataract surgery, you in general, you see perfectly, maybe for the first time in your life. So I'm thinking I have pre-cataracts, and I was talking about, well, should I have cataract surgery? And my ophthalmologist says, everybody your age has pre-cataracts, everybody. So just wait, you don't need it yet. But I'm thinking, I need it because then I won't have to wear my glasses and I can see the stars at night. But it's like, it's not the right attitude. It's American attitude.
It's so funny that you say that. I mean, the opinion or worries that I have actually heard more about is, oh, my doctor says I should get my knees replaced. I wonder, I don't know. I really like my knees, my own knees for 60 years. They worked fine. I worry what, the new knee would be. And so I hear more about that, but I suppose the other end would also, would also exist. It's funny that you talked about the eyes, because that's actually what I'm working on right now. The current book I'm writing is about the eye. And I had LASIK surgery many years ago because I just couldn't wear glasses. And now the effect is kind of wearing off. I think it's a decade now. I'm thinking, could I get another LASIK surgery? And I think the answer is no. I have yet to look into it, but so I see what you mean. Like, I want to see perfectly without glasses. Can I get another one?
I know. It's like, I've always wanted to see, there's this constellation, the Pleiades, and it's the seven sisters. And I've always wanted to see all seven stars, and I can't. But at the same time, all I do is read books. If I get this surgery, I'm going to have to wear glasses to read books, and I don't have to do that yet. So,
yeah. There's that. Yeah.
Well, we could talk about sex, because you talk about being bipedal may, in fact, be due in part to sexual aspects of life evolution.
That's one theory that I wrote quite a bit in the book, and that's also it's very controversial too. I mean, there are a lot of different theories when it came to, again, a lot of it is honestly, we just gather the evidence we can, right? I mean, I'm not saying that people are just sitting there and coming out with wild ideas. There are evidence out there, but there's always a speculation because we cannot go back and, watch the replay and see how the history unfolded through millions and millions of years. So there are many theories, like, ones we've heard, I think some people have heard is, we stood up because when we went to when our ancestors went to, the savannas, we need to stand up so we can see prey, or we can run away from predators. So that's, the surveillance theory or something to that effect. Or there are theories that talk about when we stand up, we're better able to control our body heat and body temperature and all that. So I kind of talked a little bit about these in the book, but one that I talked the most about is sex, is for reproductive purposes. I should say the word purpose gets little tricky because evolution is not purposeful, essentially, right? It's it just happened and it worked. So this theory believes that we when we stand up, we have a better chance of reproducing. There could be, as we talked a little bit earlier, we would be able to gather food a little bit more efficiently, standing up. And then so that helped with the survival of the newer generation, the kids that are being brought up, and mothers can stay home and take care of the babies and stay out of the harm's way. And when they stand up, they can carry babies, and all of that put evolutionary pressure on the joints and all of that. So that's a very, very simple summary of the theory. It's more complex than that, like social bonding and all of that. I think it's interesting to write about. I also felt like it would be controversial, and which made it all the more fun, in my opinion, because I'm sure some readers, even as they hear this very, very crude summary of this theory, would maybe have a knee-jerk reaction that, oh, wait a minute, that's very sexist. How come women are staying home? And I did get, and I did kind of write about that a little bit in the book too. But so yeah, so there you go.
Yeah, and the same thing is true about when you begin your talk about the differences between performance in sports between men and women. And obviously the starting point is the pelvis. And because women have a wider pelvis, the interesting thing too is you talk about the different pelvis, that there's different pelvis width by ethnicity. One's it's longer. But talk a little bit about why the wider pelvis creates issues with the knees.
Right.
For women.
Right. So again, I like to sometimes, I think, poke these issues that are a little bit sensitive, because I think people wonder, and that's one of the things I've often heard. Not often, I've heard, by people who are just everyday people. They say, well, women have bad knees because, they have wider pelvis. And there is literature on that. And generally speaking, compared to men, women do have wider pelvis. And that is, again, tied back to reproductive needs, because women have to give birth to babies. And as our, earlier ancestors are becoming bigger brained, the babies are becoming bigger brained. So, compared to the brain of an ape, for example, our brains are bigger. So you need a wider birth canal to give birth. So your pelvis got wider. And when the pelvis is wider, everything being equal, so your pelvis, I have diagrams in the book, but just imagine it's wider, so your leg, your thigh gets more angulated as it connects to the knee. And that is believed to cause more stress on the knee, because your quad would be pulling the knee sideways, and there's a stronger pull, and then your patella may not track as well, at least according to the theory. That's why, women may have poor knees. So I poke these issues, but then I try to poke holes in these theories, which I think it's kind of the fun that I get. So then I write about, okay, so then research shows not every woman has categorically wider pelvis. If you look at different populations, Native Americans, African Americans, for example, Asians, they have different pelvises, right? So it's not really a categorical truth that women have wider pelvises. So, and there's also, and even if, yes, compared to men, that women do have wider pelvises, but does that really make a difference when it comes to the knee health? That's still something, that's still an open question. So, yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing is that, just like you're talking about you being a weekend warrior, well, that's not really the best thing to do. And the idea that when you do these active sports, you are basically encouraging your knee to perform better, but at the risk of not performing as long.
Yeah, it's definitely something to think about, right? I mean, on one hand, you do have evidence that shows stressing the knees, all these high-speed running, and running is not even the worst, is the decel, the cutting at speed, the turning at speed, and in contact sports, the unexpected movement of other players, they do take a toll on the knee. I mean, there's a reason why athletes, especially in some of these sports, have higher injury rates than, just everyday people who is more of a spectator, or who don't do these very vigorous competitions. On the other hand, if we stress something, stress parts of our body, we exercise on it, they do get stronger. So it's always a dilemma that it's always a dilemma.
Well, it's like pitchers in baseball, their rotator cuff is necessarily going to need eventually whatever they call it, Tommy John surgery. In fact, Phillies needed it. And then it's better, but it's not the way it was. So it's a vicious cycle. But and one of the things you wrote about, which I never really connected, no pun intended, but was the IT band, because that really hurts.
It really does hurt.
And I've had that, and the roller kind of works, but the roller doesn't work. It kind of works.
Yeah, it kind of works. I have IT band issue, and I wrote quite a bit about that in the book. And I did a lot of reading on how to cure my own. I know I shouldn't. I'm not a medical doctor. I never try to give diagnosis or treatment to anybody, but you kind of want to. Because after you go to one doctor after another, one therapy after another, and it's not getting better, you go, well, I know my own pain the best. I know at what angle it hurts. I know how I can make it hurt. So maybe I can try to treat myself a little bit. So I read a lot about it, and I kind of wrote about it. I made fun about it, and all these devices that may or may not help, surgeries, whatever. And I do have IT band issue. And the rollers, I've come to, and I talked about this in the book. I do think if you can roll your muscle and make it more relaxed, it helps.
But it's the myofascial release.
Yeah.
And then that's where I can't really, you're tying it to the knee, but I can't in my mind tie that to the knee in the slightest.
Okay, so where does your IT band hurt? At the hip?
Cool. No, right on the outside, right below my butt on the outside.
Right.
I can feel it right now.
Right. So the whole IT band starts from up there all the way down. It connects to the knee. So it's the whole area. And I think, and that's the whole complex thing I talked about earlier. It all depends on individual's anatomy and your sports activity, your habits, the way you use it. Some people will maybe feel it at the top. I feel it down at the knee. So there are two insertion points, right? One is right at the top, and then one is right below around the knee area. So mine hurt down there. So, and it hurts really bad. It's a terrible pain.
I know. It's not a dull pain. It's more of a sharp pain, and you can put your finger exactly where it hurts and make it hurt really bad, which I tend to do.
Yeah. So I'm just looking it up here. A thick band of connective tissue that runs down the outer side of the thigh from just above the hip to just below the knee. So it's just this band. It actually has more than two insertion points, but one is at the top and one is at the bottom. And I've heard people who say theirs hurt around the hip area, around the thigh area. But mine doesn't hurt there. Mine is down there at the knee. And it's the same exact sharp pain you're talking about. It's not dull. It's like stabbing sharp pain. And the doctor could make it, that's, what one of the doctors did at the examination table. He's like, where does it hurt? Like right around here. At that time, I didn't know it was IT band. So he pinched it right there. And it hurt like hell. So, and the thing is, it just kind of gets stuck. It wouldn't, because it's a band. So it wouldn't get back. So, and then I know, oh, okay, I guess that's what it is. So
we sound like two people at a cocktail party complaining about our ailments.
Yes, we are. Yeah.
But it's funny because now that we've been talking and thinking about it, and again, say this tongue in cheek, at the beginning, I don't think you're really fair to the knee because it's got like 20 different jobs it's got to do. It's really hard. It's like saying, why are you picking on me? I'm doing the very best I can.
Yeah. I think so. And I think that's what some people maybe, again, I was, thinking of the Wall Street Journal article that's out there, and some people say, well, my knee is, as perfect as It's how evolution intended to be. I don't know if they're thinking of creation or whatnot, but let's not get there. But yeah, it is doing remarkably well for, for what it is, right? It can make so many different kinds of movement. I think I talked about in the book, it can move sideways a little bit, it can rock, it go, obviously back and forth. So it's doing remarkably well. And it's allowing us to do all these crazy things, not just walk, but run and all these competitive sports that, I think other animals may wonder, why are we bothering doing all these, right? Like using our body in ways that may or may not be intended for. So I guess, but it is a little bit of tongue in cheek. If we are trying to do these to our bodies, if we are pushing ourselves, it's all the more reasons we should know about this part of our body well.
Yeah, and it's like when you do talk repeatedly about cutting, which I can, you can just imagine cutting in football when you are trying to avoid being tackled, and then pivoting in basketball, which is really, really hard and unnatural. And then when I go to the gym, there's these kids, which make me jealous, and they have those 30 or 36-inch foam blocks, and then they just do a standing jump up onto it. It's their knee doing it. And I'm thinking, yeah, they have power. They have, they're pushing against the floor, but their knee is doing the actual work. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I can remember when I was younger, 20 years back, I would never, I probably could do things like that. But now it's just, my knees can't do it. And I have to just be aware. And I think it's not just the knee. I mean, I wrote the book on knee, but I'm sure if I write a book on the hip, or I write a book on the ankle, or I write a book on the foot, everybody's is gonna have issues on the lower back. I just happen to have bad knee. So maybe it's not just the knee. If we push our bodies in different ways, and not just even sports, I'm thinking in my, with my line of work, I keep this position, I don't know how many hours a day. I standing, sitting in front of the computer, typing. So my shoulder, my right shoulder was the one that controlled the mouse, and then my lower back are definitely feeding it. I don't know if that's evolution. That's the way that evolution intends my body to work. I don't quite think so. I mean, that's not what the hunter-gatherers were doing. Not very far back, right? So we are making things. We're doing things and therefore making our bodies suffer.
Well, you shouldn't be saying this to someone who's 71 years old, because. And the problem I have, maybe the problem you have too, is I think I can still do what I did. That's where you really risk major injuries. Like I'll walk on rocks, or I'll walk on a rock wall, or walk on a fallen tree trunk and assume that I can do exactly what I did when I was 35. And I'm very happy because it's worked so far, but it's not smart. You and I both do things that aren't smart. And I think that's what leads to a lot of this.
Right.
Well, in any event, this was wonderful. The book was wonderful. Like I said, if you want to delve further, the footnotes. Oh, and the illustrations are great too.
Thank you.
The illustrations.
Thank you. I made most of those myself too. So I'm glad you mentioned that. Yeah, I do. I'm part of my research is also visual communication, visuals in technical and scientific communication. So, I mean, there's some pictures, of course, that's not mine, but most of the line drawings, I drew them myself, and I enjoy doing that.
My favorite part of what we talked about is the fact that you don't really care that much if people get pissed off at something you wrote, and you kind of enjoy the idea of poking. I think that's the best part of it. I think that makes a really good author.
Yeah, I try to. I still get upset, so I try not to look at the comments too much. I mean, I've been an educator. I've been a college professor for decades, for over a decade, and I know I cannot please everybody, no matter how hard I try in my classroom to be fair, to be informative, to be clear. And I think the same carries over to writing. I put all the hours, all the work I possibly could put in, all my heart into it. And I'm proud of what I did. And I kept true to my style. I want to be entertaining. I want to go to areas that may be a little sensitive. I want to show science is never black and white. I want to show the complexities of it all. And I don't know it all. So I never try to quote unquote educate. And if people resonate with, my voice and my style, great. And if they don't, I guess that's fine too.
That's great. That's a great attitude. And I'm looking forward to your book on the eye, because I assume you approached it the same way. You're not an expert. You're not an expert at first, but at the end, you're going to have a quarter of the book is going to be notes and bibliography, which is hard work.
Yeah, that's how I envision it. I had a lot of fun writing the new book, and so I'm approaching the eye in much the same way. And there's a lot. I would say I probably would venture to say even more research on the eye, which probably it's not surprising.
Yeah, it's much more complex in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
In any event, thank you so much. I really enjoyed speaking with you today.
You're welcome. I enjoyed talking with you too.
Bye-bye.
All right.